Hi, my name is Paul Adansky, and I am the head of threat intelligence here at Tessian, and I run the threat intelligence program for Tessian to help secure the human layer.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elvis Chan. I'm the Assistant Special Agent in charge of the Cyber Branch here at FBI San Francisco. I manage 9 squads that are responsible for the cyber investigations in this office, the digital forensics, technical operations, private sector engagement, public community outreach, as well as public affairs.
Hi there, my name's David Kennedy. I'm the CEO of Trusted Sec and CTO over at Binary Defense. I've been in the security industry for over 20 years. Started my career off working for the military intelligence side of the house doing cyber warfare. Author of a number of open source exploitation frameworks, the Social Engineer Toolkit, Magic Unicorn, the Pen Testers Framework.
Hi, I'm Josh Uvor. I'm Chief Information Security Officer here at Tessian. In my role, I lead our information security program, our threat intelligence team, as well as IT.
My name is Matthew Pascucci. I'm the Director of Security Operations at Evercore. Evercore is an investment bank located in New York City, UK, and across the globe. Within my role, I run a team of analysts that go out and kind of search for emerging threats. We look for alerts that come through, anything proactive, reactive. We're just the eyes and ears of the organization from a cyber monitoring standpoint.
My name is Ashley Bull, Solutions Engineer here at Tessian. My role is responsible for end-to-end product evaluations of the Tessian platform, and I'm having daily conversations with organizations about the ever-evolving threat landscape.
Hi, I'm Ben Ong. I'm the Chief Risk Officer at Sage Group. And at Sage, I'm responsible for cybersecurity, our risk function, internal controls, business continuity, insurance, and compliance and ethics.
My name is Amelia Dunton. I'm a Customer Success Manager at Tessian, and I'm responsible for making sure that my customers get value out of the Tessian platform.
Hi, my name's David Aird. I'm IT Director at DAC Beechcroft. My duties entail looking after our 3,000 staff globally, large presence in the UK, Latin America, and also Europe.
So my name's Simon Lamb. I head up the IT security team at Mishcon. I look after our internal cybersecurity capability, which involves a bit of strategy, C-level reporting, project support, governance risk and compliance, and anything else related to cyber.
Hi, my name is Austin Zide. I'm a product manager at Tessian, focused on overseeing the platform and third-party integrations. That consists of overseeing the platform's scale to support the world's largest enterprises, or integrating with the most valuable third parties to optimize your SOC workflows.
Hi, I'm Matt Egan, Director of Technical Strategy at Okta in our corporate development organization. In my role, I have the pleasure of working with strategic integrators that are either in the mergers and acquisition space, Okta Ventures, our corporate venture capital arm, or they're a strategic ISV where we're seeking to build differentiated integrations together.
So my name is Helen Patton. I'm an advisory CISO at Cisco Secure. I've been in this role about a year. Prior to being in this role, I was the Chief Information Security Officer at The Ohio State University here in Columbus, Ohio. I was in this role for 8 years, which was way longer than I expected to be in the role. But higher education is super complicated and a super great place to work. So I really enjoyed the job, but it was a long time. And then prior to that, I was 10 years at JP Morgan Chase. So I went from financial sector to higher education sector. And now I'm back at Cisco and I am doing the vendor thing. So joined the dark side, not doing operational security work anymore, but working with a whole bunch of CISOs across the planet to help them with their operational work. So I'm enjoying being on the journey of cybersecurity careers.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Tessian's Human Layer Security Summit. I'm Stacia Gelano, Solutions Engineer at Tessian, and I'm so excited to be your host again today. On behalf of everyone at Tessian, I want to thank you for tuning in from all across the world. We started this event with one goal in mind, to bring CISOs, InfoSec leaders, and cybersecurity trailblazers together to discuss and share the very latest insights and strategic playbooks in human layer security. We've heard time and again from industry leaders and reports that human error is the most common cause of data breaches. These errors are opening up the door for risk, whether it's that moment when someone has just clicked on a phishing link or receives an email impersonating a coworker. So whether it's ATO, BEC, ransomware, or the next generation of threats that's keeping you up at night, we're tackling it all today, giving you the tools to shore up your defenses and help you supercharge your security. Today, we've gathered top CISOs and cyber visionaries to open their playbooks and share high-impact, quick wins for building defense in depth and advanced security systems. Our guests include security experts from Okta, Cisco, and the FBI, as well as many more. They are here to open up their playbooks to reveal how they are constructing advanced security systems. So, while you can just sit back, relax, and enjoy the sessions we have lined up for you today, there's ways you can get involved too. For those of you who are joining via LinkedIn Live, there's a link to the chat in the description below. If you're sharing your top takeaways on LinkedIn or Twitter, please remember to include #HumanLayerSecurity so that we can join your conversation. Remember to request and complete a demo by March 11th for a chance to win a coffee machine and 100 coffee capsules. And if you experience any technical difficulties, you can contact us directly at events@tessian.com. So without further ado, let's begin. Our first guests are here from the FBI and Trusted Sec to share their top 3 inbound security lessons to stop advanced attacks. I am delighted to hand it over to our first host, Tessian's Head of Threat Intelligence, Paul Ladansky. Here's new vulnerabilities, ransomware, and supply chain attacks. 3 lessons to make you rethink your inbound strategy. With guest speakers, Dave Kennedy, CEO and founder of Trusted Sec, and Elvis Chan, Assistant Special Agent in Charge at the FBI.
Thank you, Stacia, and hello, everyone. I'm Paul Ladansky, Head of Threat Intelligence here at Tessian, and I'm delighted to welcome Dave Kennedy, founder of Trusted Sec, and Elvis Chan, Assistant Special Agent in Charge at the FBI, to the virtual stage. Elvis and Dave, thanks for joining us today. Dave, starting with you, supply chain attacks need to be top of mind in 2022. What has monumental incidents like Log4j highlighted about these vulnerabilities?
I think when you look at all of the attack surfaces out there, we hear about ransomware every day, nation state attacks. One of the ones that definitely keeps me up at night is supply chain attacks. And that's because it's taking advantage of, third-party trusted suppliers of our software, our code, of our infrastructure, of our cloud infrastructure. I mean, everything runs off of software development companies. We don't just build our own operating systems. We don't just build our own, phone platforms. And all of these are susceptible avenues for attackers. We saw with NotPetya was kind of the monumental one that we saw where, the Russian intelligence agencies hacked into the Ukrainian tax software, pushed out updates that caused ransomware. I think it caused over $100 million worth of damages in FedEx in under 20 minutes. We saw the damages there, and then we saw SolarWinds where they literally ripped into most of the large backbone technological companies. I mean, Cisco, Microsoft, Intel, VMware, were all hit by these specific attacks. And it goes to show you how predominant, how invasive these types of attacks can be and hard to detect because of how we trust our third-party software update processes. You look at Log4j as an example of that. When we're embedding in, third-party libraries into, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of software applications, these types of attacks are even harder to fix because they're embedded so much into the technology platforms that we use. I can honestly say, every single day that we're doing security assessments, we still run into Log4j in almost every single organization that we go into. So these types of attacks are going to be around for a while. And it's one of those ones where, when you're starting to look at how these attacks occur, we saw ransomware groups taking advantage of Kaseya recently, a third-party managed service provider, where they targeted 1 to hundreds, thousands of customers. Those are going to be the next fronts of attack. From ransomware groups, it makes a lot of sense. Why go after one individual victim when you can target 1,000 victims and get a much larger payday, from these companies and organizations? So, we have a lot of different threat models that are kind of coming into play here with supply chain attacks. And it's honestly one of the most devastating, the hardest to detect. and ones that we aren't designed for in our infrastructure to actually protect against because we trust our third parties. And that's just how it's always been.
Yeah, I totally agree. I've seen organizations just scrambling when this first came out to try and find where these third party libraries were being used and deployed. So that was definitely a good one, a good highlight. Elvis, what are you seeing from the law enforcement side of things that you'd be able to share with us?
So I completely agree with everything that David said, and he didn't even owe me a cup of coffee for that. So um, we're seeing the exact same thing. And so, I'm here at FBI San Francisco, and we're the lead investigative office for the SolarWinds breach. So you can imagine, I can't talk specifically about that investigation, but what that case and other significant breaches have taught me from a law enforcement angle is that we need to go to zero trust architecture, right? And so right now, I think companies are definitely moving and everyone's advertising. So it's still not super defined. Like NIST has tried to come out, there's a white paper, it's 800-207, but we're still trying to figure it out, right? So I think if we as a community can figure out a good framework for what we want zero trust to look like, and then agree on that framework and then push it out. I know a lot of people aren't agreeing. They're just pushing out zero trust right now. But definitely, I think that is the wave of the future.
Yeah, for sure. Dave, what do you think the broader outcomes are for the security world?
Well, to hit on the zero trust aspect of things, I think as a philosophy and principle, it makes a lot of sense, right? Because you're trying to minimize the ports and protocols and services that you traditionally would have from an attack surface perspective, and you're also saying, okay, let's minimize our impact if something were to become compromised or breached. Essentially microsegmentation or segmentation as a whole. And so you're getting more towards the ability of these types of breaches, and where you see most amount of damages occur out there is really around the lateral movement component of things where one specific system becomes compromised and they're able to leverage that initial foothold into other areas of the network and access sensitive systems, intellectual property, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's why you look at the social engineering aspects of things, or the phishing campaigns, and why that's always been so successful. You target Bob and Sales, and Bob and Sales doesn't have all the keys to the kingdom or intellectual property, but that's through the castle doors inside the castle now, and all of a sudden you can start moving to these different parts of your network that now have all that intellectual property and data. So the major breaches are due to the ability to spread across infrastructure and architecture, and that from a ransomware perspective, whether that's backups, your SQL databases, your domain administrator accounts or domain controllers. The more access that these attackers have, the more damage that you see specifically around ransomware. And same thing from nation state attacks or organized crime groups. It's that spread aspect that makes things all this possible. The good news on cybersecurity strategy is that I think we're focusing on the right things. You look at 10 years ago when I was in this industry. I've been in it for over 20 years. 10 years ago, we'd go into organizations and they were super focused myopically on fixing technical findings, whereas today most organizations recognize, hey, we're going to have vulnerabilities and exposures that put us at risk, whether that's through social engineering or phishing, or whether that's through a patch that we forgot about, or hey, we didn't identify this log4j issue in one of our custom applications that we identified, and now attacker has access. How do we minimize the damage to our organization? How do we shelter off these systems from an architecture perspective? How do we identify what attack footprints look like in our infrastructure and respond to these to minimize the damage? So we're having the right conversations around how to shut these types of attacks down, regardless of sophistication level. It's just a matter of implementing them in very complex legacy systems, really complex organizations, businesses that have to really redesign and innovate their infrastructure and architecture and update it to more today's standards. So that's the big challenge. Is it's a complex problem that isn't going to be fixed overnight, and there's no like magic solution or magic piece of software you're going to install. Just really hard work effort, kind of changing the business, changing the technology, changing how you look at things, and trying to minimize your damage and approach to these types of attacks.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I know 10, 20 years ago, security was a function, but as time has moved on, security has just been embraced by whole organizations from C suite down through the rest of the organization. It's so important for everybody, I think, now to be part of the security culture. So we've seen ransomware groups flocking to exploit the vulnerability. Why are these perfect conditions for ransomware groups to strike?
So right now, I think there's two things going on. Number one is COVID, right? Like, God, we're at the 2-year milestone of COVID and it's still happening. So what does COVID actually mean? It means a lot of us are teleworking more than ever, right? And so when we're teleworking, that means we're working from home and we're working from a home wireless router. So there are vulnerabilities, as both of you know, and hopefully your audience knows as well, right? Like one of the things I see is a lot of people use the default password on their wireless router. So that's like one of the big issues that I see. If I can give you one homework assignment, it's to figure out how to change your password and use a complicated one. Or maybe even better, get a password manager, right? So that's number one. Number two, what we have seen uh, exponential growth in is ransomware as a service. So in the old days, like so ransomware itself, it's more complicated than you think it is, right? So someone has to develop the ransomware. They have to recompile it and keep changing it up so that it will evade firewalls and antivirus, right? So that's one group, the developers. Then there's the ones who actually speak and write English well enough so that they can, either send the ransom letters or do the negotiations, if they're on Skype or whatever medium. And then there's the getting the ransom part, right? So you have to have a money meal network. You have to have, like services, like money laundering services, they're called mixers and tumblers in the business. But like there's this ecosystem and it requires like large criminal syndicates. And that's what the FBI is good at. We're good at going after big players, even if they're spread across lots of countries. And what we hadn't intended is this thing called ransomware as a service, which is similar to like if you have a fast food restaurant, I won't name any of them specifically, but if you want to get a piece of the action, you pay a franchise fee. And then guess what? You get all of the branded stuff from that fast food restaurant, right? So, and so, we're the lead office for DarkSide ransomware, which, I think some of was responsible for the Colonial Pipeline hack. So we don't think it was DarkSide, the main syndicate. We believe it was an affiliate. So someone who paid the franchise fee got access to a control panel and all of the infrastructure and was off to the races. And so the problem with being able to franchise out is you used to need like large, groups of people. Now you can literally be, a knucklehead 16-year-old. If you can pull together the franchise fee or, it's the affiliate fee, you're off to the races. And that has been the problem. And we have seen a lot of these knuckleheads really being indiscriminate in who they're targeting. And, like Colonial Pipeline is just one of them, but JBS, right? Like things that, no offense to these companies, I'd never heard of, but like they're responsible for, 40% of the meat distribution on the West Coast or 40% of the oil distribution on the East Coast. It's these kinds of things that smarter, more organized groups would not go after because the sweet spot is staying under the radar and not making the front page of the New York Times. But when you do that, then obviously you get the full attention of the FBI. And you can see that we've had a lot of law enforcement actions, and I'm predicting a lot more law enforcement actions because we have a lot of active investigations. In fact, we have over 100 investigations on all the different variants of ransomware. So just keep looking for big splashy takedowns from the FBI.
Well, definitely. Thank you for the work that you and the FBI are doing in this.
Thanks.
One thing to note on that too is it's been awesome to see some of these groups actually taken down, right? Actual, raids occurring via Europol and joint efforts between the FBI. There's been a lot of raids on these various groups and again, affiliates, people that are actually running the groups themselves. So I think there's been a lot more pressure put onto these ransomware groups over the past. And I really think that's going to be, key to knocking these groups down. The only issue that you typically see is, you knock one of these groups down and then, 10 other followers then kind of spurn up and spawn off of that and they start their own groups, or a lesser sophisticated one now gets more funding and backing and they start to develop their capabilities. So I don't envy your job of what you're doing day in and day out, but at the end of the day, getting more of these folks off of the streets I think is the most important aspect around this, and being hard on these groups so they do shut down.
No, I appreciate that, David. I agree with you. I mean, it's a continuing cat and mouse game, right? I think one of the differences that you've seen is we don't necessarily, like in the old days, we would arrest the people and then seize the funds like all in one fell swoop. Nowadays, right, especially taking advantage of blockchain technology, if we can seize back the funds, even if we don't have handcuffs on the subjects yet, then we're going to do it, right? And I mean, you saw our New York office. I mean, they just had that massive seizure, right? Like over $2 billion, and those people weren't even the hackers. They're just one of the money laundering groups, right? And so,
Did you see the rap
like
videos
if
for
you're,
those?
oh my God, yeah, that the wife, yeah, ugh, like it's, but like you can see, like in the old days, we would just leave them in the wind and then swoop in eventually. And it could be a year or two from now, but now like we're trying to cause as much mayhem and disruption as we can because I mean there's billions of dollars of losses, globally every year. So I mean this is definitely a paradigm shift for the FBI and all of our international law enforcement partners.
Well, this is a very interesting discussion for sure. And speaking of ransomware, I mean, clearly it's a sustained threat to businesses. Why do phishing emails remain the delivery mechanism of choice for it?
I think when you look at phishing campaigns, that's the easiest method, right? When you look at perimeter defenses, organizations, kind of consider themselves probably like the M&M syndrome, where they're hard on the outside, soft on the inside. And when you look at that, it's you have to do a lot of research to do reconnaissance against an organization's external perimeter. Potentially find a flaw or missing patch, and the ability to get things like remote code execution takes time to go after systems. So there's a lot of time investment in that, right? Whereas if you're targeting an individual company, maybe you do, and maybe you're doing targeted attacks against individuals through open source intelligence gathering. I mean, you can craft a pretext and attack in a day. Your infrastructure is already probably predominantly automated, and you start to send out your weaponization of tooling and everything else that goes around there. You're looking at maybe a couple of days of investment of time to compromise an organization versus weeks or months that it would take. It's the same thing on the 0-day angle. Microsoft, Apple, Linux have put so much preventative mechanisms in remote code execution type of flaws that it's very expensive. And same thing for mobile devices. It's very expensive, and you need a high level of sophistication to be able to exploit those types of vulnerabilities to go the 0-day angle. Whereas 15 years ago, 0 days were flying off the shelves. I think it's the bar of entry. Lower sophisticated groups can leverage phishing, especially if they're using ransomware as a service type areas where the weaponization and tooling, the command and control has already been designed for them. It's already designed to evade, EDRs or antivirus products or things to that effect, and then they can land themselves on the systems. In these groups, you look at, I know some of the documents were leaked from Revil and a few other ones where you can see how they actually operate, within an organization. They have walkthroughs and guidelines of how you do lateral movement. What tools do you use? How do you run the encryptors? So they're very methodical in nature once they are already on the inside, and they have a lot of automation built around a lot of things that they do. So I think phishing is one of the easiest because it's a low bar of entry. It doesn't require a highly sophisticated hacker that is developing and weaponizing tools and things of that effect. But at the end of the day, it's just makes it a lot easier to go after the user versus trying to crack the perimeter.
I completely agree with David on this. And what I like to say is like, we're already talking about Web 3.0, right? But guess what? We're still on human being 1.0. And like in the FBI, like based on my experience, out of all of the cyber investigations we have, I would say 80% of them were able to access networks or devices through social engineering, through phishing, through text, like smishing, all of these things. 80% is still like David said, it's the way to go, right? Like we're still the same human beings. And I would say our brains are probably more overloaded because we've each at least got 3 or 4 devices on our bodies. That's not even like the things in our house, right? Like, I've been guilty of this. I'm at home, I'm looking at my smartphone, I've got my iPad up, and I've got the TV on. And like my daughter's sitting on the couch next to me, texting with their friends and doing the exact same thing. So we're distracted, and the criminals take advantage of this distraction. Like, oh, like I didn't pay attention. I clicked on a link I shouldn't have. I mean, I don't, but like other people do, right? And so the criminals can still take advantage of that.
And I'll add just a really quick 20-second story here on the distraction aspects of things. I was doing a social engineering campaign against an organization, and I phished a user, and this is obviously simulating a hacker going into an environment. And we phished a user, got their username and password, and I went to authenticate to their VPN concentrator with my username and password. And I didn't realize that they had multi-factor authentication in place, and it was already set to do what's called a push notification. So it sends a notification to your phone, and you have to hit approve or deny. And in that box that pops up, it'll say where your location is. So I was coming from Cleveland, Ohio. and this user was in like a different state all the way across the other side of that side of the house. And in my mind, I'm thinking, oh man, I totally messed this whole fish up. I'm gonna have to tear down my infrastructure. I'm gonna have to rebuild everything again. I have to launch an attack against somebody else. My whole attack is burned. And I get up to use the bathroom and I come back, and all of a sudden I'm logged into the VPN concentrator. The user had clicked approve because they thought they were logging in from somewhere else. So even the technology that we're used to, we get so accustomed to using it day in and day out, and so many distractions, as Elvis had mentioned, that we just get so confused. We're just like, oh, I'm sure I'm logging in from somewhere, and I just hit approve, even though it was an attacker at the time. So it's amazing to see those stories when you actually go and do it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And in my experience in the past too, a lot of times when working with customers, I found that that's exactly what happened. They would get an email and they would go ahead and click on a link, or they would click on an attachment without any further thought. It was just that sweet spot of timing for a distraction that was just needed for the infiltration to take place. Okay, so how can we prevent ransomware earlier in the email cyber attack kill chain?
So, I guess I'll steal a little bit of David's thunder. For me, there's really two things, right? Number one is to do exactly what you said. Like, we're still a human being 1.0, so providing training to not be distracted, right? Like, and the problem, it's hard though, right? Like you do an infosec course like once a year. The good companies that I work with, they'll do it at least like on a monthly basis, right? And if you're on the naughty list, like a couple, 2 times, 2 months in a row, like there are ramifications, right? So I do think training is good. Um, but there are technology solutions. Like when the FBI switched to DMARC for our email, it was amazing. It reduced like the spam email I got by like 99%. So that was awesome. But the other thing that I see that companies do not do is having good backups. And I don't just mean online backups, I mean having cold storage, right? Like having some offline backup, because like I'll talk with companies, oh yeah, Elvis, we've got all of these backups of our most critical data. And then they go to restore from them and they've all been corrupted, right? All the new variants of ransomware look for your online backups and they jack them up, right? So if you don't have anything offline, you're completely hosed.
Yeah,
Yeah, to
and to
add to
that
add to
point
what
too, it's oh, I was just going to add, yeah, to that point too, there's got to be some type of process where you're testing those backups that you
Yeah. Oh,
can go ahead and
absolutely. Yes.
recover. Yeah.
Yeah.
to
Practice
add
what you
what
preach.
Elvis was saying there, I think the backup strategy is important. I think also going back to the basics of things, education awareness, backups are important, but going into things like multi-factor authentication, or not even allowing full VPN access into your environment, and going more towards that zero trust model, right? Become more of a service provider, not providing everything to somebody. Interesting enough, Microsoft just released 22% of their Microsoft 365 or Office 365 customers use multi-factor authentication. So only 22% of Microsoft's users use multi-factor authentication. That's abysmal, in my opinion, in the grand scheme of where we should be. So if you're listening right now and you don't have multi-factor authentication on, close the browser and put multi-factor authentication on right now across your entire organization enterprise. Honestly, that alone, if you look at Jen from CISA, the Critical Infrastructure Security Agency, Jen said that I think it was like 99.98% of the attacks that they saw could have been prevented by multi-factor authentication being appropriately applied, across their infrastructure. MFA is such a huge thing. But also, if you look at the three main ways that ransomware groups are going after you now, that it's what we call more of the trifecta approach of where they're going after your backups, they're going after stealing the data, and then auctioning that off from a ransomware perspective, and also hitting you with distributed denial of services. You need to build those into your threat models of how you protect against that. And I think Elvis hit right on there. It should definitely be centric around, hey, what is our backup and recovery strategy? Because that's going to be your most critical aspect. And then working inward, outward of saying, okay, what does an attack look like in our infrastructure? How do we minimize damage there? How do we look at it from a detection perspective, and keep moving outward until you get a good defensible approach against these, because they're not going away. And one of my leads on the incident response and threat hunting team over at Trusted Sec recently said, listen, the capabilities of these ransomware groups are getting to the same level as nation states, from a research and development perspective, the weaponization of tooling. So they're not going away anytime soon, and they're only going to increase in sophistication because they are being so successful with this. So we need to do stuff now. We can't wait, a year, 2 years, 5 years. It's immediate action is needed to prevent these types of attacks.
Yeah, completely agreed. So another question that I have is, why are attackers continuing to take advantage of employees and their access?
Well, because it's the soft underbelly, right? As David mentioned. Yeah, in my experience too, and I didn't know those numbers you cited, but yeah, in my experience, only about 20% of the companies that I deal with in the Silicon Valley, which you would hope would like have the highest level of technical sophistication, they use MFA, right? Most like, so that means 80% of the companies, and I'll ask, right? I'll ask the CISO and I was like, hey, do you guys use MFA? He's like, I really want to, Elvis. That's on my list of things to do, but everyone's really against it, right? And in the US government, specifically in the FBI, it's been like 10 years now. I remember they sent us an email and said, we are switching to multi-factor authentication in 2 weeks. And then in 2 weeks, they switched us where we have to use RFID chips. And then, we have a little token that generates a PIN. And, and then we have a password that we have to change every 60 days, right? So 3 factors. It was a massive pain in the ass. People revolted, but guess what? You're in the federal government, so nobody cares about your feelings, right? But now it's like second nature. Like I don't even think about it now. And I would argue once people get over that initial friction, it would be fine. And yeah, like it's a lot harder, like David said, right? Like to have to use a 0-day so the 3 ways I see people getting in are like through social engineering, through unpatched but known vulnerabilities, and through 0 days. And I would say 0 days is like less than 1%, right? Because as David mentioned, so expensive. But like I do see a lot of times where, like Microsoft will push out a patch and then the bad guys will see, oh, that's the vulnerability. We're going to inject ransomware right into it, right? Because they know companies aren't going to be fast enough patching all of their stuff. But like those are the issues that we see and they continue. Like, man, I agree with David. If we could do one thing, it would be MFA for everyone.
Just to put
All
in
right.
perspective, I
So
implemented multi-factor authentication as the chief security officer at Diebold, 25,000 employees in less than a month. So it's doable across a global, organization and company. Communication is key. Stage rollouts and making sure you address people's concerns and then you roll it out and people get used to it. That's how it works. And MFA is one of the top ones right there for sure.
definitely agreed with you. It all comes down to just starting to generate that muscle, right? And then as people start to use that muscle, it becomes a memory. And then to your point, right? It's just part of the process now. People can start doing it and without any thought. So, with that said, Elvis and Dave, thank you so much for sharing your insight on these threats with us today. You've both had very fascinating vantage points on these issues, so we're grateful you can join us. I'll be handing back over to Stacia, who will take us on to our next station. Stay tuned.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. What an excellent way to start us off. Now, on to our next session, which I am so excited to share with you. More and more enterprises are adopting behavioral tools to supercharge their Microsoft email security. Our next speaker is sharing a deep dive look into how they built high-impact defense in depth by augmenting Microsoft with machine learning technology. This session is packed with takeaways for teams to supercharge their email security. Enjoy the Defense in Depth Playbook, How to Augment Microsoft 365 to Supercharge Email Security, with Josh Yavor, CISO at Tessian, and Matt Pascucci, Director of Security Operations at Evercore.
Thanks, Stacia, and hello, everyone. I'm Josh Yavor, Chief Information Security Officer here at Tessian, and I'm thrilled to welcome Matt, Director of Security Operations at Evercore, and a Tessian customer to our virtual stage today. Matt, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Let's dive right into it. We've got a lot to talk about today. So, can you tell us a little bit more about your role leading security operations at Evercore so we can get an idea of what's within your scope and purview and what your day-to-day looks like?
Sure, yeah. So my role at Evercore is to manage a team that is focusing on security operations. And that means anything that we're looking for, active alerts, emerging threats, anything that's going to affect our business in a negative way from a cyber standpoint. So we're doing a lot of proactive work. We're doing a lot of reactive work by investigating alerts and doing such. So anything that kind of fits within that realm of monitoring and detecting threats today, we kind of take part of.
Got it. And as part of that broad security operations domain, an age-old reality is the need for defense in depth, right? How do you think about defense in depth at a strategic level at Evercore? And are there any strategies that you can share around how you've approached a layered security architecture?
Yeah, so, there's no silver bullet with anything. So we're always looking for ways to layer on additional defenses. If we have a particular area where we're strong in, there's always going to be areas that, we shouldn't always be relying on that one area. So as we speak about, throughout the next couple of minutes on Tessian, is like we have multiple ways of protecting against email, but why do we use Tessian? Why do we use other ways of protecting ourselves in defense in depth? It's because we don't want to rely on one area. I think that's just a tenet of security that we have to continually focus on. That can go from a network, it can go to the endpoint, it can go to anything, application security. Wherever we are, we can't rely on one particular area or control, and we have to have those mitigating controls in place, those supplemental controls in place, so that if one was to either get bypassed, had an issue, there's an outage, whatever, that we're not just sitting there wide open, that we have other ways of detecting or at least reducing the impact of an attack or a threat or something within our environment so that we can contain it. So never relying on one particular area or control is a tenet of security, and that goes down to the network level, to the endpoint level, to the application level. And I think that's something that we're focusing on heavily, and as the industry is, right? So definitely something I would recommend. That's why I think we're using Tessian, and we'll get more involved with that, is helping us determine and detect very nuanced alerts from email security.
Right, and diving into the email security layers there, right, and thinking about defense in depth, how have you layered email security approaches, including Tessian, to protect Evercore?
So there's a lot there, right? So, as everyone knows, Microsoft is fantastic at what they do, but there's always areas of improvement everywhere, right? So we don't rely on just Microsoft alone. We use it, it's known. But we make sure that we have Tessian there built in so that when our users are either clicking on things or reviewing things or data is being sent, that we have an extra area to supplement, to validate that we're doing what we should be doing, our due diligence, that we have everything in place so that if there was something from like we use, like Defender, right? If there's any type of impersonations, if there's any type of misdirections of emails or insider threats, those type of things that Tessian offers, we can get down an extra layer that at the time Microsoft is helpful with, but the partnership, I wouldn't even call it supplemental, but the partnership between Tessian and Microsoft is what makes everything combined, right? That's what's really helping us become better, is by not just we're talking like that almost a defense in depth area where it's like, well, this one does this layer and then this one does the next layer. It gets very interesting when we can have them integrated, and that's what we're looking to accomplish with Microsoft and Tessian, is that integration, that interplay between the two of them, where they're almost following up on each other, and that's where this defense in depth really becomes helpful with, is when we can have partners like the two of you guys that are working together that give the customers the best advantage of both worlds.
Right. It's definitely a very crowded space in terms of not just vendors and solutions, but also attacker behaviors and risks that people need to address in terms of protecting their organizations. So thinking about the Tessian and Microsoft integrated value that you've built out at Evercore, how do you think about the balance of capabilities and getting that right? And so some of the things that, actually one thing that we share, right, is that in my role, I also am a Tessian customer. I just happen to be employed by Tessian. So this is always top of mind for me because we use our own product, of course. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you balance the applying a rule-based approach for security to leaning on solutions like Tessian that bring behavioral approaches to protection for email as well. How do you think about where rules fit in and where behavioral-based solutions fit in?
So that's a good question. So rule-based is, in my opinion, that's the table stakes, right? You need to have the rules there. Like, that's in place. It should be there, it's working, and then as you kind of mature out there, you start bringing in the ML, you start bringing in the behavior. It's difficult to come out there and say, we're only going to do behavior, right? It's also difficult to say, we're only going to do rules. So you need to have that both in some type of mentality where they're going to build off of each other. So it's just similar to like signatures today in antivirus. People going back and forth being like, oh, we're only behavioral. It's like, well, if you can have a signature to know a known threat, like why would you want to use behavior? So building off of the rules, from an email perspective, like email security perspective is great, but then taking that another notch up, like this is where we're talking about the Tessian world. It's like that behavior is now where we're starting to look at, maybe something wasn't firing with a rule, or maybe there's been something very nuanced or something that we're catching that the rules can't catch because they're not as direct. And that's the exciting part for me and our team, is where we can start going out there looking at things that, we have this, machine learning or this behavior where someone wasn't doing something malicious, but they were doing something suspicious. Like, let's dig into that a little bit. And that's where we can start really gathering more detail and getting that understanding of, okay, that wasn't overtly wrong, but it was definitely something we want to keep our eye on. And that's where the behavior comes outside of the rules. You get those outliers. And the outliers are the ones that I want to focus on. That we want to start looking at. The rules are always going to be there, and they're great, and we rely on them heavily, I'd say, for the majority of things, right? The interesting ones that the rules can't catch, that's where the behavior comes in. That's where I think as an industry we're seeing a lot of people move towards.
Right, absolutely. I think one thing, thinking about like my experiences and that of my teams, one thing I've noticed, I'm curious what your experience has been and how you think about this this balance as well. Is the management aspects of the tooling and capabilities we just talked about. I found that there's, and it's different for each team and organization, of course, but I think there's an interesting trade-off between the management overhead and the requirements for investing in rule definitions, tuning, and so on, as attacker behaviors change, as organizations change as well. How do you and your team approach getting that balance of management investment right? And are there any strategies that have worked well for you in terms of enabling scalable and effective outcomes?
Well, I think it's going to be tuning always, right? There's always going to be tuning in some way, even from the behavior side of things. Like there's going to be certain alerts that are coming in from the behavior side that are like, hey, we know these, we know what this is, we should get down to the details and make sure that that's not happening from a behavior side, because that's known and that's fine. Now with the rules, it's a little bit easier to tune because it's very more, it's binary, right? It's on or it's off. It's found something or it didn't. The behavior ones is definitely the area of tuning where even with Microsoft, right? So we can get things tuned by the way that we respond to certain things, and our response is helping tune systems. You have that type of mentality going out there, so we have to constantly be looking at it. That's really what it comes down to: understanding your tool set, understanding what systems that you have in place and what they have to offer, and exactly what they're giving you, and not just letting them just alert. So if there's alerts that are coming out, we need to be able to dig into them, understand them, tune them from every direction, so that we're also tuning the behavior. So there's going to be behavior built into a system, and it's going to, by itself, right? It's programmed to do a thing. And if we can go out there and have that thing now learn from us on how we react to those alerts, we're now training it on how to respond better. And that's something that I think we as an industry need to be consistently doing, not just relying on the machine learning of saying, this was bad, but more so of why was it bad, and then determining on, hey, that wasn't bad, and by responding back to the system, you're teaching it to say, going forward, we've seen X, Y, and Z happen, their response is going to be this, and then the machine learning kind of learns from you based off of the algorithms that it has kind of in place, and I think that's helpful across the board, because otherwise we have Skynet, and Skynet's not a good thing.
Yeah, nobody wants that, at least not yet. Although, if I recall correctly, didn't we just pass a few years ago the go live date for Skynet? I forget when that was, but I think at least from movie lore, we're past that point of risk. But maybe it's any day now.
Encouraging. It's encouraging.
Or maybe it just means that our robotic overlords are just on the horizon, so to speak. So you mentioned something really important that I don't think we spend enough time talking about as an industry, especially in email security in particular. I find in talking to other testing customers and talking to my peers, just more broadly in the industry, that while we have very consistent and reliable security operations playbooks and coverage and so on for many domains of alerts and attack surfaces that we protect, I find that it's surprisingly diverse in what security operation components are in place for email specific security. And so can you tell us a little bit more about how you actually operationalize the actually like after alert, after event type of activity that either Microsoft or Tessian is bringing to your team's attention? How do you think about what's important to respond to and get that operationalization right?
So I guess from that standpoint, it's going to be tuning, right? So we're going to have to know the system. We can't just rely on the alerts that come out of it or the information that comes out of it. So understanding the system, having that cadence with vendors to go out and say, like, what new features do you have? How are we dealing with these new alerts or anything that's coming through? Doing that baseline check of the actual system, either that's Microsoft, that's Tessian, what have you, but just knowing your tools, right? Understanding what that is. So then you get more involved with the training of, okay, now that we know our tools, we understand it, what does that mean from training aspect from both the admins as well as the users? So, we have a lot of user training that we go through. I think everyone in the industry does, or they should be going through that. So as they see certain things and, they're aware of what's happening through their email and what have you, there's a way to react to that. There should be an expected understanding of what's expected from a user, what's expected from an admin, both from a user receives an email and they get a pop-up from Tessian, what does that mean? And then from an admin, understanding, hey, that pop-up actually happened, or there's something going on in the background, what does it mean from an alert standpoint? So having the tuning, having the education on it is very important from both the administrative side of things as well as the user side of things. And also I think is kind of important is documentation. So, as everybody starts building and growing their systems and growing their teams, and you want to kind of have that documentation done first, and that's an internal thing. That's kind of like eating your own dog food kind of deal is, you're building something out, you're getting it done. How does the rest of your team know? How do you have junior staff come on board? How do you have people who for the very first time are using Tessian either as an admin or using it as a user? What does that mean? So understanding that, documenting it, so that it's not the first time people are seeing something. Because I guarantee you that you're going to come across something, and then within the next 2, 3, 4 weeks, you're going to see it again, or somebody else is going to see it again. How do you not have to be reinventing the wheel every single time? So I guess to answer that question, just is it's a constant tuning of the system. It's understanding your tool set. It's understanding your training. So you got to trust in your training, and then going out there and just kind of document everything, and then kind of trust in your documentation. So that's how, you can apply that to anything really, but that's
right.
Also another way of doing it with Tessian, yeah.
That's great, and you mentioned something in that overview that I think is really important to talk more about as well, which is the actual experience for day-to-day people working at an organization in email, right? So you mentioned the engagement that occurs, for example, when Tessian Defender flags something as potentially risky or malicious. How does that fit into what we think at Tessian we call it human layer security, right? But what does that mean in terms of you and your team and your organization in terms of engaging with and effectively empowering the actual people that you're supporting when those things happen? How do you think about getting that right?
So like when we get those alerts, and we get alerts like that, our investigation kicks off, and we start understanding why it was caused. And then as we start getting through that, there might be things where we have to reach out to a user. There might be things where we need to do more information in the background, right? So if someone is, and this is just, once again, this can go across the board, but if you're seeing someone doing something malicious right away, and they're like, hey, this is bad, then you have to start doing more of a incident response and start, going through your process, going through your procedures, understanding, what caused this and why. There's other things where there's going to be blocks where they're, as misdirected emails, right? From the user standpoint, like they should understand exactly what that means and, what it's caused, and just making sure that they don't, not that they don't do it again, but this is there to protect them. It's not there to stop business. It's there to assist with certain things. So just understanding the tools, how to react to those alerts, both from a user standpoint, because they're going to get pop-ups, and then from the the administrative standpoint, as when they get alerts, and that goes back down to training. Goes back down to training and documentation, and we're gonna that's just a constant operational thing, because we're seeing this day in and day out. If you're seeing it more than twice, it should be it should be repeatable and it should be documented, and that's something that we're just aiming to make sure that we're efficient, and it's one of those things that's kind of lives in operations.
Got it. So we've gone into pretty good depth here for a bit, and we're coming up on time shortly. So let's zoom back out a bit. Still staying within the theme of email security, but maybe we can wrap up with this question and theme. One of the things that we're seeing, and Gartner has actually called out as well, is a trend where organizations, especially newer organizations or those that have recently made a shift from on-prem to cloud-based email and collaboration, is that traditional solutions like secure email gateways are not necessarily being utilized in the same way that they used to be. And as an organization that's using Microsoft and Tessian in tandem, when you step back and beyond Evercore and just look out across the industry, what do you think about that trend? And do you think that how do you think about getting the right tooling in place as part of our new world of cloud-based emails?
Yeah, I mean, well, the future is the cloud, whether that's going to be from, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, SaaS, wherever they're going and wherever those organizations are moving towards. If you're in the cloud, then you got to go. Like, yeah, it's not like you're going to have, you're dragging this anchor of the on-prem solutions with you. So if you're going cloud, it's going to be all cloud. That's just the way of the future. That's my personal opinion. That's not an Evercore opinion. That's just kind of where we are, what I'm seeing personally in the industry, like you said. So just moving towards the cloud, it's going to assist, in my personal opinion, on how things are being done from an operational standpoint, how things are being done from even just a budgetary standpoint of, like, do we want to keep on all these old school data centers and keeping all these things in on-prem, but having things more in the cloud, where now there's less ownership, but there's also, at the same point, you have the ability to essentially just transform the way you're doing things, right? There's less patching, there's less issues with hardware, but at the same point, you're getting the benefits of the resiliency, and you're getting the benefits of just having that cloud environment where you're able to scale better. So as companies are going to the cloud, we're seeing that scalability. We're seeing people just kind of go out there and just cover their infrastructure in a very diverse manner, which does not lead towards having things on-prem. And that's just, I think that's the trend, and that's the trend that trajectory's been going for the past 5-10 years now. So I just don't see that slowing down in any way. So that Gartner review that you were saying before is people moving more towards cloud, and I just, it's all there. It's everyone's going that way. It's you can't stop that train. So there is definite benefits there. There's also going to be the additional risk of now understanding where your data is, compliance and governance, and what does that mean by having some of these solutions and services outside of your purview. And so it's a double-edged sword, but you look at it from the security standpoint, it's probably something of need, and it's definitely helpful.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. This unfortunately is all the time we have for today, but I just want to appreciate you joining us, sharing your experiences and these insights, Matt. And it was great again to just hear your thoughts on building layered and robust email security defenses and so on. So with this, I'll be handing it back over to Stacia, who will take us into our next session. So please stay tuned.
If protecting the human layer from inbound attacks is a growing concern for you, then you'll love this next session. Our next guests are here to discuss how they protect against these risks without delaying their fast-paced workflows. Here's Preventing Advanced Attacks and Influencing Safe Behavior in Fast-Paced World of Tech with Ashley Bull, Sales Engineer at Tessian, and Ben Ong, Chief Risk Officer at Sage.
Thank you, Stacia, and hello, everyone. I'm Ashley, Solutions Engineer here at Tessian. I'm having daily conversations with organizations about the ever-evolving threat landscape, which is why I'm very excited to welcome Ben Ong, Chief Risk Officer at Sage and Tessian customer. Ben, welcome, and thanks for being here.
Hey, Ashley, thanks for having me.
Great. So can you start off telling me a little bit about Sage, specifically what security pressures you're operating with given the industry that you're in?
Of course. So Sage, for those that don't know, Sage is the UK's largest technology company. We're a software company that makes back office products for small and medium-sized businesses around the world. And so we have a whole set of pressures to manage from a security perspective. As a software company, it's really important that we're agile, we can work quickly and support our development teams and engineering teams with the right sorts of security interventions with as little friction as possible. And we have to manage all of the risks that you'd expect from, predominantly cloud-based software products, just one step away from the internet with a whole array of attackers that would be motivated to gain access or compromise the data that we hold on behalf of our customers. And we hold some of the most sensitive data that our customers have. It's their HR data, their accounting and financial data. And so the duty or the custodianship that we have on behalf of our customers is vital and something that we take very, very seriously.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, sensitivity of data, really the focus there on obviously protecting that, but preventing users from maybe even responding to a malicious email, something that we have daily discussions with organizations about. There's also a lot of discussion surrounding this idea of defense in depth and the zero trust approach. Do you have any frameworks or even guiding principles for structuring inbound security approach at Sage specifically?
Yeah, we do. And, those terms, defense in depth and zero trust, they're used so widely now. They've almost become, well, they're buzzwords or even a cliche now. And I think sometimes it's easy to forget what we actually mean by those terms and think through exactly what risks we're trying to manage and what outcomes or security outcomes we're seeking. At Sage, when we think about zero trust or inbound threats generally, the first question we ask is inbound to what? Because an inbound threat to a user via email is very different to an inbound threat, via RDP to a server or one of our cloud services. And so how we manage those threats or those risks is very different depending on the context. And I think, if you look behind the buzzwords, actually there's some really important lessons for businesses like Sage and many organizations about how you think quite specifically about the risks you're trying to manage and the outcomes you're seeking and tailor your security interventions and your posture around those risks. Gone are the days where there's a kind of one size fits all. There's one version of defense in depth in a business. We might have, 20, 30 different versions of defense in depth depending on the context. And so, on one hand, that's a hugely complex picture to manage, but on the other, it means that we can really think specifically about the risks we're managing in that context that I mentioned and how best to address them.
Absolutely. And I'm curious to hear a little bit more about how you've seen board interest change at Sage regarding inbound threats. For instance, we know ransomware attacks are constantly hitting the headlines, so curious to get your insight there.
Yeah, well, our board, I'm sure like many boards, are very, very interested in how we're managing inbound threats or ransomware related risks. Particularly our non-exec directors who, are probably part of other organizations, some of whom may even have experienced these threats for real and have had to work through those sorts of incidents. And so I think we don't suffer from any shortage in engagement or interest from the board, but how we put that interest to best use is the trick. And I think, it's a very difficult space, particularly for CISOs. And you often hear it's a live topic of discussion between CISOs about how you both generate and then actively use that board interest, how you explain what are very, very complex technical risks in simple, plain English, or with simple terms without recourse to jargon. And I think winning that situation and really bringing the board on side, making them appreciate some of the nuances and complexity without having to see it all, I think is a really important objective for people who need to report to management about their risks and what they're doing about them. I mean, at Sage, we try lots of different ways of doing that, and I think some of them are more successful than others. I said I'm very lucky that I've got such an engaged board, but it's my responsibility to make sure that I make best use of that time. So what I put into our reports, making sure that we're to the point, we're clear about the risks and what we're doing about them, making sure they understand the bigger picture. So what's our security objective? What's the end game for us? What's the risk appetite that we're working to, and why is that the right one for Sage? And then bringing it to life, with demos, examples of how attacks really happen, even thinking about the sort of diagrams that you might include in a board report, so that they're not just your typical kind of technical diagram. You've really tried to explain, using all of the tools available to you, whether they're visual tools or sort of report writing, exactly how things have unfolded. And then finally, the thing I would say, and I think this is a really important lesson, is that if you're not a technical person or you've not worked in IT or technology for your career, then it's very confusing trying to put together all the pieces of a technology ecosystem in your head. What's a website? What's your back office services? What's your cloud services? What's the other services you're drawing down, the third-party services? For a board member, they might not understand how these things either are interconnected or not connected at all. And so really making sure that you set out that kind of bigger picture, that map of all of your technology in a way that's easy to understand, I think will help you, a great deal when you're trying to explain, how an attack or a particular risk might manifest within it.
No, I think that was super insightful, and completely agree with you there that I think so many people, even who do not have experience within maybe IT and security, everybody knows the buzzwords ransomware or even different types of attacks that we're hearing within the news. But to really break it down, like you said, and I think lay out the bigger picture, it makes complete sense. Now, in terms of this defense in depth approach, I'm just curious, how are you mapping and really categorizing different types of inbound risks?
So, I mean, we think about, as I said, the context that the different services or assets that we're trying to protect exist in. So, the category of inbound threats as it relates to our data centers or our server estate is very different to a sales colleague on the move with a laptop, traveling around the world. And so when we think about inbound threats, we can't think about a traditional enterprise IT perimeter as we might have done, just a few years ago even. We have to think very specifically about, exactly what the target might be, or the objective for an attacker, and how that would play out in real terms depending on the context. And so just to give you an example, we think very carefully about the kind of pressures that, say, our users might be under in different circumstances. Whether because we're a software business, the kind of pressures that an engineer are under is very different to someone working in HR or someone working in finance. But they're all subject or were likely to be targeted by inbound threats. But our response and our mitigations might be subtly different. And again, obviously, those mitigations are going to be very different for attacks against services, like a cloud service or one of our products. And so I think, we have used different categories of defense, and that sometimes means doubling up. It means using different tools or having, multiple tools that effectively achieve the same outcome, but in the different contexts that you're operating. And I think, like many organizations, we've got one foot in the old world where we've got legacy technology that we need to protect and manage. And we've got the kind of new world. We've got the sort of zero trust dream. We've got users on the move. We've got almost perimeterless environment in many cases. And, the tooling and techniques that we use to protect that are very different from, what we might have done or what we might need to protect from, 5, 6, 7 years ago.
Sure, for sure. And especially with, I think, a world that is so remote right now, like you said, and kind of that move to a different approach versus perimeter where everyone used to be in the office makes complete sense. And I really like what you said around just the context and that, the pressures that different people within the organization may feel dependent on their role and how they are operating day to day could impact how they might be targeted, and what type of security practices are needed to best protect them. So really appreciate that insight there. Curious if you could tell us a little bit about how you've been working specifically with the Tessian platform to mitigate these types of social engineering attacks that Sage may have seen and many other organizations have as well.
Yeah, of course. And what I really love about uh, the capability that Tessian provides me is that I can effectively tailor, the experience or uh, the the support and advice that I give to colleagues to them, because it is cognizant or aware of that user's context, what the sorts of emails that they might receive on a day-to-day basis. It means that the support and the advice, and the nudge that it gets from Tessian is very specific to them, and that's hugely powerful and not something that is easily achieved in any other way, I don't think. And we, like many organizations, will mandate e-learning programs around security. We have comms channels. We do our best to sort of get out and about in the business and make sure people understand why security is so important, what it means for them. But those things are ultimately going to be some distance away in time from the moment where you want a user to make the right decision. Someone on the train or running for a train, someone at home, like you say, in a remote working context, someone in a rush because they're late for something or they've got a million other things to do, like many of us are every day. And what you are doing, with a product like Tessian, is you are giving them that very, very timely intervention in the moment, in context that's very in a context that's very specific to them, on the basis that in that moment they'll make the right judgment. And that is just such a much more effective way of managing these risks than, I said, trying to treat them, several months in advance for an e-learning program, or solely relying on someone having read an intranet article that you published. So I think that's the beauty of it, and I think what's so powerful about the tool.
No, really appreciate that insight there, and completely agree. This is a lot of similar feedback that we've heard from other customers and organizations that we work with. That in the moment training is so powerful because, like you said, right, if a user is constantly looking at emails on a regular basis, right, that distance from their annual awareness training, maybe it was last month, maybe it was 6 months ago, maybe it was almost a year ago. It's really that reminder in the moment that just assists the user so much in making the best security decision possible and really just training user behavior on the fly in the moment. So I guess what kind of assumptions has Tessian challenged really or made you rethink when it comes to tackling some of these inbound threats?
So, I mean, first thing I say is it provides a completely new data point for us. So, it gives us an insight into uh, who in our organization is receiving what kind of attacks or threats, and in a way that we didn't have before. So, the assumptions that you might make about your enterprise is that you could assume that phishing threats, for example, are fairly well distributed amongst your users. You could make assumptions that teams or business areas that you think are higher risk are going to be disproportionately targeted. And what Tessian does is it gives you, an accurate view through, the interactions that your users are having every day with the outside world through email, and allows you to either to test and confirm those assumptions, or find out, as we have done in a few cases, that they're completely wrong. And I think that is really powerful because, the point we were just making around, the other sorts of training interventions you might make, what you can do is create a very kind of mutually reinforcing situation where, you know very clearly, because you've got the insight and the data to prove it, that particular teams are targeted in certain ways. Therefore, you can make sure that all of the training and support and communications that those teams receive is targeted and focused very specifically around those risks. And rather than giving them a generic or incorrect feed of communication or training that is based on said an incorrect assumption. So that specificity is really, really powerful, and I think is how you can challenge and test those assumptions.
Absolutely. And you touched on this a bit there, but curious to hear from your experience what level of impact Tessian has had on Sage in regards to really the ability to report on specific risks.
Yeah, of course. And, like many organizations, we've been reporting on phishing simulations for a long time. It's a kind of bread and butter statistic or metric that many organizations use in their security programs. And I think what we've now realized is that, while it provides some insight, and gives you some ability to gauge, the efficacy or the impact you're having through your sort of training and communications interventions, it really is very superficial. And so, with a product like Tessian, we can give reporting to either management or board or any other stakeholder in the business really specific examples, which not only help them understand exactly the sorts of risks that you're trying to manage, but more than that, they bring it to life. Like I was just thinking about, when we first started using Tessian, some of the really, the real examples of where people had been faced with emails that had been tailored, phishing emails that had been tailored to them and their business context, helps you empathize with those users and understand why they might well do make the wrong choice when faced with one of those emails, because that would be a totally normal thing to do. And then equally, when you look at things like misaddressed or outbound risks, misaddressed emails and so on, you can really understand actually how that happens, where people might accidentally add a personal webmail or something like that address onto a CC field, explaining that in sort of real terms to people that you need to report to, I think allows them to appreciate these risks in a much more real way, rather than in a sort of a generic way, which is we're all pretty desensitized to.
For sure. Ben, thank you so much. This has been such a great discussion. I know I've learned a lot from this, and I know our audience 100% has as well. It's really been interesting to learn about how you've built such an effective security dialogue within your board. And thanks for sharing a lot of those actionable tips and tricks that we can all really take away from. And that is it from us. I will be handing things back over to Stacia, who will take us into our next session.
Great insights. Thank you, everyone. When reputation is everything, how do you protect client data from advanced attacks? Our next guests are here from Mishcon de Rea and DAC Beechcroft to walk through how they maintain secure practices to ensure email security. Sit tight for this one. This panel has some great recommendations for ensuring ultimate email security. Enjoy Ensuring Ultimate Email Security in Law Firms, where reputation is everything, with your host, Amelia Dutton, Customer Success Manager at Tessian, and panel, Simon Lamb, Head of IT Security at Mishcon, and David Aird, IT Director at DAC Beechcroft.
Thanks, Stacia, and hello everyone. I'm Amelia Dunton, Customer Success Manager at Tessian, and I'm so excited to be joined by David and Simon as thought leaders in the legal industry. And we're going to be discussing how they ensure email security at law firms, which is obviously a highly regulated industry where reputation is everything. Tessian works with quite a number of different law firms globally, so I know that this is set to be a very insightful session for our audience. David, Simon, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Perfect. So to kick things off, let's just have our panelists introduce themselves. David, we'll start with you, and then Simon will hand over to you, and then I'll begin today's discussion.
Thanks, Amelia. Hi, everyone. I'm David Aird. I'm IT Director at DAC Beechcroft. We've got about 3,000 employees across the world. Nice to see you all.
Hi, Simon Lamb. I head up the IT security team here at Mishcon. We have around about 1,500 users, mainly based in the UK.
Perfect. So we'll jump right in, and I'm going to pick on Simon first because, I've been working with you for around, yeah, getting off easy at the start. So, Simon, I've been working with you for around 6 months now, and it was your first sort of foray into the legal space. So, very, very keen to hear your perspectives here and how your perspectives may have changed over the last 6 months. So, how did you find the transition to the privacy laws and regulations that you're trying to solve in the legal sector? And how do they compare with what you were dealing with previously?
So it's been a really interesting journey over the last 6 months or so. So I thought sort of coming into the legal world that we'd be faced with a similar set of requirements, a similar set of obligations, etc. I think probably my biggest learning point has been around the speed and the response that my colleagues expect from our technology team, from a security team, down to simple things that they want emails to be delivered immediately into people's inboxes, and the whole speed around response time, etc., was something I just hadn't come across in previous lives. I think we come across a lot of similar challenges, however. So making sure that we protect our personal information, but our primary focus point is around protecting our clients' information. Clients have to trust us with their information, and we need to be making sure that we are protecting it as well as we can do so.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, David, from your perspective, given that DAC have global offices, that's a lot of privacy and data regulation to deal with. How do you manage that?
Yeah, I mean, like Simon, I think there's lots of regulation, around the globe. I mean, we normally try and suit, whatever the highest is and have a, sort of genuine global set of standards, making sure that, in one of our small offices in South America, where we might have 15 colleagues, that they have the same sort of level of security we would in headquarters. So definitely, but it is a challenge, and I think, Simon's right. I mean, this is my first law firm. I've been in law for 8 years, and I think with law firms, the challenge is you have to be whiter than white. So, most of the laws and regulations are the same. Obviously you've got the specific legal sector regulators and the SRA and that type of thing, but it's still the same. ISO, regulations, that type of thing, GDPR that everyone else operates under. But I think, what you might get away perhaps in another, commercial company, you're certainly not going to get away in a law firm, because you are expected on everything to be showing the best standards, on everything that you do.
No pressure then.
No
So
pressure
for
whatsoever. Easy. That's why we look so
yeah,
miserable and you look so happy.
walk in the park. So, focusing in on those ICO requirements specifically, how do they factor in your email security approaches? I guess, and has this changed at all since you started using Tessian? Let's start off with David with this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, going back to the white on white and people like the ICO, in law firms, we have to record, any of these sort of, breaches and issues. And that's where Tessian has really come in, because it's, by far cut massively the numbers of those sort of issues, and not every, misaddressed email, that type of thing, most of them are not major issues, it's your holiday, email or something you've sent to the wrong person or something. But sometimes it can be quite serious, and certainly, tools like Tessian, amongst others, can help that, and the ICO regulations and now the 4% of global turnover, these sort of things, it's more important than ever. I think, if you go back 5 years ago, 5, 6, 7 years ago, I think the highest fine you could get was about £400,000. It's now unlimited, as far as I'm aware. So it's certainly a serious business, as it should be. This is, people and companies' personal, and important, business critical data. It should be protected. Let's face it.
Definitely. What are you thinking about that, Simon?
So I've sort of based my cybersecurity strategy around three key pillars of prevention, detection, and recovery. So I think historically, a lot of companies took the approach of, right, we're just going to be able to prevent absolutely everything. And we all know that that is just not possible. You know, I can unplug all the computers from the internet and somebody will still do something with our data. So it's making sure we've got the right tools and processes in place to be able to detect activity, apply the right level of business context and therefore effectively the risk, and align it to our risk appetite, and then make sure we've got the appropriate steps to recover from those as well. So small things like making sure that we've tested a response. So if we do detect something in Tessian, what's the right process that we go through so that we make sure we're following the correct process so that everybody gets treated fairly.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Um, so Simon, I guess on that point, how do you balance your information security objectives with the way that fee earners are working in, a high pace, high stakes environment?
With difficulty at times is probably in the summary of that. I think it's all down to making sure you've got the right level of engagement with the business. The last thing I want to be seen as a team of people that just say no all the time. And starting to bring people up to speed around risk and the risk of information, and do we really want to do this, and is it the right thing we're doing with our data as well? So there's always going to be a level of risk that every company has to operate under. It's making sure that that level of risk is aligned with the appetite of the business as well. So things like setting up data loss prevention steering groups that are business led rather than technology led means that I'm actually getting the right source of intelligence to be able to apply the right controls in place.
Yeah, that's very interesting. David, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think Simon and anyone that works in information security has that difficult balance. It's easier for me to say yes to things at times, but I think, as Simon said, I'd almost do sort of yes, but well, we can do that, but this is maybe it's a bit like when you have good HR support, they're guiding you to what is the business outcome you want and what's the safest way to do it. And I think good information security is like that. Well, you could do it that way, but here's the risk. Well, if we just do it that way and tweak the approach, then we can be almost as nimble and quick and serve your customers quickly. But we can just make it a much safer proposition. And I think most people respect that. So it's not a no, as Simon said. It's I would almost call it a yes, but here's an even better solution.
Yeah, and just to follow on for that point, David, I've had some really successful conversations and relationships developed by the fact that we've gone in there and go, if you do this, this is the risks that we could face. And 99% of the time, the senior business person's gone, actually, I don't feel comfortable with that level of risk. Thank you. I didn't understand it beforehand.
That's really interesting. So David, I'd love to hear more about, why do you think it's so important to focus on the human layer when it comes to cybersecurity?
I think as we said in the in a question earlier or earlier today, I think it's that is the most important. I mean, Simon spoke about sort of three things and three pillars, and I think everyone has 3-4 pillars over. I mean, in my mind, to me, it's sort of three things. It's the human layer, sort of basic patching, that type of thing, basic stuff, and then more advanced security tools like testing things. But for me, the first and that everything that wraps around it is the human element. No matter where you are in the chain, you are introducing risk. And the amount of times I find, I was, pressed the wrong button in one of our phishing tests the other, a few months ago, and it was usual. I was under pressure. It was whatever time of the day, etc. And it's so easily done, and there's me with a lot of experience. So it's, and I'm always sympathetic to people in our business as well. But it's you just have to be so careful. And that's why training and making sure people, we all have to work under pressure on things, but it's just making sure that you just take that extra few seconds, just to absorb what the email, the communication, the text, whatever it is that might be, slightly amiss, and try and get it right. And no one is infallible. You will get it wrong. So it's again how you deal with it. Get straight on the phone to IT or to people like Simon. I think I've just pressed on this. The worst thing is not to tell us. I always say to people in our, partners in our business, please just tell us. We've all made mistakes. So get on the phone. But I generally think the human part of it is the most important. because if that fails, then you're reliant totally on the tools, and vice versa, I suppose.
Yeah. Anything to add there, Simon?
Yeah, just to support David's viewpoint, which I 100% agree with. I looked at a sort of a people, process, technology approach when it came to actually implementing the strategy as well. So spent a lot of time doing awareness campaigns, making sure we're not just taking the off the shelf material, we're completely tailoring it to our requirements, our risks, etc., and also to celebrate and encourage people to report activity, because we're all human, we all make mistakes, and actually, the last thing I want is to people feel worried and concerned and upset that they've done something and not feel that they have the confidence to be able to report it, so we can actually deal with it as well. So we don't name and shame. We very much encourage people. I've recently conducted a phishing exercise. We're actually going to be following up with people to say thank you for not opening the email and thank you for not clicking on the links as well, just to kind of provide that reassurance that they're doing the right thing.
And that's a really good idea, Simon. I like that as well. I think it's, we're certainly jumping on to the people, in a nice way, obviously, to give them more training and things. But I think thanking the people, it's you have to balance that with interrupting their day again. But thanking the people that didn't click on it is definitely important. And I think as well, all of this is good, but there is a balance to be had. I mean, our people are now. Sometimes we almost have to send an email first saying we're going to send another email about a survey or wherever it is, particularly if it's an external email system that we are using ourselves for whatever reason. People are so paranoid, rightly so, but there is a balance to that. People cannot be on red alert all the time, let's face it.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised. So we have a abuse@mishcon.com email address, which we've communicated widely, just to allow people to say, right, if you're not sure about something, just forward this email across to us. And I was really pleasantly surprised with the number of emails we got in when we launched the recent phishing campaign. So it was just a measure of saying actually the awareness campaigns are working properly. I also positioned the phishing test as a way of testing to make sure my awareness material was working properly. Then I need to do something about it to make sure that it does work properly in the future.
Definitely. And then I guess from your end users seeing these defender warnings, then how do you think that actually impacts that amount of time you would have otherwise had to spend had those emails just been sent through, if users thought they were suspicious but didn't actually have it confirmed by Tessian?
So I think within the company, so Tessian is a known product, and people, when I was going through my induction process, referenced Tessian in a positive way, as a useful tool and a tool that people rely on. It's making sure that they don't, although Tessian is a very good product, it cannot be 100% perfect. No technology solution can be. So what do I need to do, and when do I need to be able to provide around that to make sure that they're complementing the work that Tessian does for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Perfect. So I guess shifting gears slightly, David, would love to hear from you a little bit more about your tech stack for inbound email security and what you use outside of the end users.
Yeah, I mean, I think as I said earlier, first of all, for me, there's the basic human stuff. So, awareness and making sure they're as up to date as possible. I suppose then you've got the basics, so making sure the PCs and Outlook and everything else are as patched as possible on the servers and things. Dependent on if you're in Azure or Microsoft Exchange online and things. And then things like I would call them maybe legacy email filtering and antivirus systems, and then maybe more systems like yourself, maybe a bit more on the advanced security side, with regards to inbound and outbound extra scanning and things that are going on and what has been sent, as well as that we've got SCM security in, God, what does it mean again, Simon? Security incident event monitoring. I can never quite remember that one. Too many acronyms.
Management.
Too many acronyms in IT. So and things like that, and we've got behavioural analytics tools as well that also look at our email systems, and then also some systems that monitor where people are. Well, hold on, David Ayer just sent an email from a location in the UK, and now all of a sudden he's sending another email from Zimbabwe. That does seem a little bit odd, so location tracking and that type of thing as well. So it's but again, it goes back to for me, the more, you can chuck as many tools at this as possible, but the human part of it is just so important.
I think there's a bit there around doing the basics brilliantly. One of my previous CIOs came up with that saying when it came to the whole of the sort of technology function, and it really resonated with me. So you can have all of the greatest fancy tools and everything in place, but if you're not scanning your inbound emails for viruses, or you're not doing your patching properly, etc., it's going to be quite embarrassing should you get caught in an event like that.
Yeah, we call it in our place, we call it world-class basics. So we might not have, the shiniest brand new Dell Alienware PC, but we're going to have the basics and get them right and do them well.
Yeah, completely agree.
Definitely. So David, I guess thinking back to when you first started using Tessian, what were the challenges? Yeah, what were the challenges?
I don't think there were any. I think this is why you're always calling me to be on these sort of panels, because I am just a huge fan. I can count on one hand probably, and we won't mention the UK advert for "Does What It Says in the Tin," as I always say with you guys. And we won't give them some free advertising, but it literally switched on. It worked from the day dot, and it's just reduced our risk, by massive percentages, and our exposure, and people talk about proving the value and things. It proves the value because you can see exactly what's going on and what has been caught, and whether it been coming in, going out, etc. So it's just quite an easy thing. It was quite an easy sell to get it through the board and exec and funding, and it really has been one of these ones that no one has ever doubted the investment we've made in Tessian. So well done.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, brilliant. So top of my mind when I knew that I was bringing Simon into this discussion was that Simon and myself are just both confessed like DLP nerds. We absolutely love it, and it would be remiss of me to deprive my audience of hearing a little bit around Simon's perspective and stories from that. So Simon, in terms of your approach when it comes to email security, sending the wrong attachment to the wrong person, users exfiltrating data, how do you think about DLP from that sense?
Well, I'm completely paranoid, as you and I, as you know, in our conversations around this kind of piece. So I can talk about
You two
this
must be fun at parties, I must say.
So I can talk about this because we went public with it. But when I worked at Dyson, I detected using DLP somebody inside our environment selling secrets to one of our competitors. And that triggered a whole sort of flurry of activity where it was part of a pilot group around DLP. Let's see if it's going to provide any benefit to us. To overnight, just get this technology, get it rolled out. Let's see exactly what's going across the whole environment. So that was very interesting, and there's lots of sort of knock-on effects like new contracts and various legal procedures that went into place. I think on a sort of more personal side, it's very hard given the amount of information that does flow through a data loss prevention system of being able to detect things. I was lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time one time when I actually found an employee sending a goodbye note and actually saying that actually enough is enough. And it's the first time ever where I've had to deal with a sort of life and death situation where actually, because the technology in place, I believe that we may have saved a life.
Wow, that's certainly a powerful story, isn't it, James?
Yeah,
definitely. Around, I guess, the human perspective.
Yeah.
Simon, did you have to, was that something special you set up, or was that just, it was scanning for that type? It's quite an unusual thing to be, brought up. It's not a credit card detail. It's not, sort of top secret files, but it's.
Yeah, so because we were looking at with certain groups of people that had access to some particularly sensitive intellectual property. So it just happened that we had a sort of tighter rule set in place to kind of look at the information that was going on. We then applied a rule that said, okay, right, sort of information going off to sort of Gmail accounts and sort of personal email accounts and those kind of things as well could be a higher risk to us. So therefore actually being able to sort of look at those, and it was very much being in the right place at the right time because we were gathering so much information. And one of the big things I learned about that project was to start small and grow, whereas I was told to start big, and actually you would lose things within all the other events that went on there.
Yeah.
the previous event that I referred to, I actually had a DLP rule set in place that that was looking for emails going to our competitor domains. So, and that was quite challenging because some of our competitors we actually worked with closely, and some of those we didn't. And actually having the right incident response process for it, I learned a lot in those few days or so of actually making sure I contacted the right people. Because initially it was a case, actually, don't worry about that. We're working with these people. And when I spoke to a different set of stakeholders, it's like, actually, this is really bad, and we need to kind of hit the big red button on it.
I think the interesting thing about these things is your speed of response was obviously really good, because it's, again, all these systems, are, and even things that are great like testing, who's going to monitor it, who's going to pick it up, if you're struggling with, numbers of security people and that type of thing, you can have all the monitoring systems in the world, but it's really about how you respond to it, I suppose. And again,
Absolutely.
that underlines the
Absolutely.
human layer as well.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it was down to the fact it was still in project mode. So I was heavily involved in configuring things like the policies and the rule sets and those kind of things. So actually, by being in the right place at the right time enabled me to pick up on some of these things. And it was a really good learning experience of actually then moving forward and going, okay, right, when I recreate new rule sets. So when I put DLP in at Royal Mail, I had 3 work streams. I had the technology implementation, I had the rule set work stream, and I also had the incident response work stream, because those 3 are closely aligned, but at the same time also require their own specific focus.
Sounds like a DLP junkie between the two of you.
Yeah, we're going to have a particular session on that one. Unfortunately, we're just running out of time, but it's been such a pleasure speaking with you both, and no doubt we should hopefully have a follow-up session on this at some point, because it's been such an interesting discussion. So thank you both for joining me, and back to you, Stacia.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Enterprises are preparing to pivot their security identity to protect against the new threat landscapes. But how are companies successfully prioritizing security strategies without affecting their workflows? Next up, we're talking to Matt Egan, the lead director of technical strategy at Okta, as he details trends he's seeing and how organizations can better utilize identity and human layer security. Here's Creating a New Identity for Modern Security, why organizations should prioritize securing the human, with host Austin Zide, product manager at Tessian.
Thank you, Stacia, and hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Austin Zide. I'm Tessian's product manager responsible for overseeing our platform and integrations. And I have the pleasure of being joined by Okta's very own Matt Egan, Director of Technical Strategy. Hey, Matt.
Hey, how's it going, Austin?
Wonderful, wonderful. Great to be here. So I thought a great place to start would be you just telling us a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do at Okta.
Yeah, awesome. So, hi everybody. I'm Matt Egan. My role at Okta, I get to work with a lot of technical integrations. It's fun. So my role is focused on finding, building, and enabling technical integrations with strategic ISVs like Tessian that make differentiated outcomes for our customers possible.
Cool. And I heard a rumor, you may or may not be able to confirm this, but I hear when you're not doing that, you're a bit of a Twitter vigilante, calling out brands with poor password policies. Can you share any truth to that?
Yeah, that's I am guilty of doing that. It's one of my favorite things to do when I'm going through a poor password change or a poor password establishment process, is to take a screenshot of that and to attempt to publicly shame the brand and point them to, good documents like NIST 863-3, which provides sane password guidance.
Hey, not all heroes wear capes. So we can get going here. In this session, we're going to focus on the role of identity in modern security programs. So I thought a great place to start would just to really discuss some trends you're seeing in human layer security that you're excited for.
Man, trends I'm seeing in human layer security. Yeah. Well, look, I'm excited about anything that's human layer security, because I had quite a bit of experience with attempting to implement security that wasn't human layer. So my background before I joined Okta, my background was 20 years as a practitioner in IT, starting in the help desk and moving up through. My last official role on the operations side was as an enterprise architect, chartered with implementing a security practice for the company I was working for. They had a nascent security practice, and through a series of unfortunate events, we decided that we needed a not nascent security practice. And going through that, we had a lot of security tools that we had deployed haphazardly. Hey, we had firewalls, we had IPS, we had logging, we had antivirus, and all of those things. We were filtering mail, we were doing all of the stuff that you would expect to do, and we were still suffering when it came to the outcomes, the security outcomes. We weren't hitting the bar. So the trends that I'm seeing now, I think I might have been a little early 5 years ago, looking at that and saying, hey, we need to really focus on who the users are, and ensuring that we've got veracity in that. We need to make this more usable. So the trends that I'm seeing now are catching up. It's a lot of additional focus on identity, right? Beyond trust, or beyond core models come in and have really started to resonate, and that's definitely picking up. So we're seeing heightened focus on protecting users, not trying to protect networks, not trying to protect IP addresses, not trying to protect machines. Let's focus on the user.
Nice. Yeah, I have seen some really cool stuff coming out of Google's Beyond Corp. Really, when we heard about zero trust, it was kind of all theoretical before, and Beyond Corp is one of the few organizations that's really giving a path to implementing it. So I think it's a really exciting development. Another area within these trends within human layer security, I hear a lot from. It's sort of funny. I hear a lot about it, but you don't see it. It's sort of like 5G. You see it everywhere you go, but what's the actual use for it? Who's actually using it? Is automation. Security automation is sort of filling that exact void for me. What have you seen in security automation, or even paths to implementing it?
Automation has become huge. Well, okay, so let's take a step back. I wish that automation was huger than it currently is, and I realize that huger isn't a word. Some of the integrations that I've owned for the longest time were all security analytic integrations, centralized logging integrations, and something that became painfully clear in the interactions I was having with customers that were using those integrations, with the same vendors, and it's all the common players that you're expecting. If you can think of a big SIEM or security analytic platform, we were working with them, and users are recalcitrant to just like automate actions. It's a scary thing for them. So what we are definitely seeing, though, is this progression towards streamlining the invocation of something that's automated. So it's no longer a swivel chair integration. I think what's going to happen, over time, is customers are going to increasingly become comfortable with that. The suggestion from the machine was right every time, and I was in the flow, and I get to be a part of the decision. But I keep just saying yes, so I'm going to let it just say yes now, right? So I think that automation, and this progression of automation and streamlining, is ultimately going to be the path that gives us more automation. I would like to get to a point where customers can be comfortable with the guidance that the machines that we're the programs and the suggestions that we are building mutually together are suggesting or proposing.
I like that. Yeah, and automation is so needed with the constant shortage of security talent. Automating anything we can is so huge. I remember back to kind of the early UEBAs where organizations were just trying to throw all of their data at it and make something usable. But as I've seen it progress, it seems to be moving in the direction that less is more, focusing on the right threat signals and kind of narrowing it down to the exact use cases rather than kind of a one size fits all approach. And so I really like that, and seeing how Okta is just such an incredible threat signal for understanding really where your users are, what they're doing, what tools they're using. It's one of the threat signals I see as those few that are really incredible.
Yeah, it's the crown jewels, of the internet. You could look back to any pen testers, when they, or a vulnerability, it seems like, there's kind of the crown jewels of old, which was Active Directory. Hey, we got domain admin, and that's kind of the gauntlet that everybody wants to run. Well, what's the equivalent of that? What's your central authentication framework in that forward organization, and it's your identity provider. It's Okta, and so the data that we see, and the decisions that Okta or your IDP, hey, I'm here representing Okta, but at the end of the day, I'm an identity nerd. So if you have an identity provider, that becomes the crown jewels, the data that's coming out of there, the fidelity of signal. Austin, you talk about the UEBAs. I remember looking at this. Let's just throw a whole bunch of data, into this thing and hope that something makes sense. Somebody can find some signal through the noise. And the honest, we know garbage in, garbage out. And so this progression of rich data, and authentication data is very rich, and you don't have to make a lot of inference. And somebody logging in and failing to log in, right? There's a lot of very, very clear, rich signals you can draw out of that.
Totally agreed. Yeah, throughout this Human Layer Security Summit, we've probably said the word human layer security 10,000 times, but understanding what that is, it really is every solution that sits interfacing with the user. And I think there's like no greater example than your identity provider as something that's your user's direct interface into your organization. So I just think having this conversation is like totally spot on. So in the frame of Okta and just thinking about really where security is going, having you here, it would be amiss to not talk about what you're excited for on Okta's horizon, things that are coming, or even things that maybe Okta is interested in solving in the future.
Yeah, the progression is ultimately going to be, how do we share richer, higher fidelity signals across platforms, and who's in the best place to go and amplify those signals. And it's my strong belief that the identity providers are going to be a key leverage point in that. And sorry, let me kind of explain signals here really quick. A little inside jargon. I talk about this in my internal meetings and conversations I'm having too much. It's one thing that, when we focus on the human, there's hey, they're authenticating, maybe they used a physical key to do their authentication, or maybe they used their smartphone, what it happens to be, right? We talk about the authentication, and then there's, how do I take all of this additional context and all of these other signals that are, one layer adjacent to the identity? What device are they signing in from? What network is it? What's the state of that device? Does it matter in the context of this access decision that I'm making? Are they logging into a sensitive system where there's data that we might be concerned about DLP? Well, if that's the case, I may want to know that they have their disk encrypted. Are they just logging into, to read something that's insensitive? Well, go ahead, log in with BOIOD, but I definitely want to make sure that it's you. So please sign in with one of your physical tokens, right? We don't need to have, we need to be able to, kind of make rational decisions. And the best way to make rational decisions is to have lots of information. The more information you have to make a decision, the more rational decision it can be. And so I think the identity providers have an opportune, or sit at an opportune time to consume signals from various sources, like Tessian. What's Matt been up to? How's he been? Is he behaving appropriately? Is he behaving like Matt? What does the UEBA think? Taking all of those signals, taking signals from an XDR. What's up with the device that Matt's logging into? Is it like part of a botnet right now? Is it doing other things that are bad? Right, that could be a problem. What's happening on this network that Matt happens to be coming from? Is this the normal time of day for Matt to be doing work? Hey, we just had this other SaaS provider say that Matt just signed in over there from an IP address that we haven't seen before. Right? If the identity provider gets to the point where it can converge, sorry, I'm hand talking a lot now. If the identity provider gets to the point where it can converge, all of those signals and amplify the value of those, share them across the platforms. Hey, Tessian just let us know that Matt's credentials were phished. We should probably relay that signal to every downstream SP so that they can close any session that Matt had open. So that when I do finally go and recover my credential, we're not worried about all of the existing sessions that were opened with my old credentials.
I think that's like exactly like so exciting where it's going, because what you really brought up there was understanding how identity is becoming so much more prominent within human layer security, but also how it can drive that automation, ultimately help make better decisions. And really the ultimate outcome of security is to secure the user, but get out of the way, let people do their job. That's really what we're here for. So I think that's really excellent. And so as we've discussed, really the future of human layer security, the future of Okta, let's rewind all the way back to right now. Like we're in the present. So when I talk to a lot of CISOs, they bring up this sort of disparity, this gap between the hype, the latest and greatest technologies, and then what they're actually using, consuming, implementing, and just addressing and understanding that there is this gap in security where people are. Like, how do we go forward from that? Like, knowing that what people talk about isn't what's the reality in these largest integration or largest enterprises, just because there's so much legacy technology built on top of it. I'm interested in understanding, like, from your perspective, where organizations are getting it wrong. Like, where are the gaps that they can improve here?
I think some of the biggest mistakes that people are prone to make is trying to swing for the fence. Even when they know it, I'll hear people say like, there's no one size fits all, or there's no silver bullet, or all these things. I'll hear people say that, and then watch them look for a silver bullet, or watch them buy a silver bullet, and it doesn't work, right? So I think there's pragmatism. People need to be pragmatic. The environments that I owned had so much legacy cruft, and it was daunting to start to take steps forward. But it was just this incremental, moving forward, incremental improvement. A series of 1% gains can add up over time. And one of the biggest focuses too. I think Austin, you touched on it, and this was something that got covered. I spoke at another event this week, and so I'm kind of stealing a phrase here, but it was good. Talking about how if we'll focus our technology on enabling users instead of obstructing users from doing their jobs, I don't know, there's better outcomes that come. So you get to that point, and you're no longer trying to play whack-a-mole with all of the things that your users are doing to circumvent the controls that you're putting in place. That's the other thing too. I think that maybe we as technologists sometimes get in our own way. Take password policies, for example. It's a very, very good example of good intent gone wrong, right? So go back 10 years ago, and we needed password policies because everybody was using, everybody had the same password. It was all password. It was like really, really bad. And so to get over that, we said, no, your passwords have to be a certain length, and you're gonna have to change it every, whatever, thinking that if the more frequently we made them change it, the better the password randomness and entropy was going to be. The exact opposite is what took place. And as we've seen this, as you go and look at password breaches, it's difficult to prove until you started seeing wide scale password breaches. But we're looking at these password breaches, and you get to see the passwords that people are using, and there is no entropy because everybody just does spring 2022. I'm sorry, Austin, I didn't mean to say your password out loud, but that's what we do when we have to change our passwords all the time. It's irrational, so we reduce entropy. Anyway, so the point there, where do people get it wrong? I don't think they always consider the impact to the user and the downstream consequences. So thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead.
I like that. I think that is sort of a loss when you think of kind of building your perfect security castle. It's all great when it's like theoretical with the chessboard, but in the real world, you have to think about the outcomes. You have to really understand your kind of lowest common denominator, weakest link in the chain, and work from there. I like that. So, right, always getting in the way. So, as we sort of start to wrap up, I want to talk, kind of close on identity. And so, sort of on the same thread of where they're getting it wrong, kind of the inverse of that is, how can security teams best utilize identity within their organization?
Be aware that it's there, and focus on it. I think that all too often security teams default to networks, or different tools, and understanding that identity can become this perfect abstraction layer for applying policies. And no, focusing on identity is not going to change the vulnerability that you're going to find in whatever software you have deployed, and it's not going to be a part of your patch program. So there are other aspects of security that you're going to have to focus on. But if you can focus on identity, if you're willing to make that a priority, I know it just shifts, gives you opportunities to shift the burden. If you're doing identity right, I think you get an opportunity to go and leverage more SaaS and PaaS and IaaS offerings while still maintaining some of the same security and controls there. And then what happens? You get the secondary benefit where you're no longer worrying about, right, the shared responsibility model that happens in IaaS and PaaS and SaaS, and all of a sudden you're not worried about whether or not the data centers got redundant power, right? That was a thing I used to have to worry about in my job. I had to make sure we had redundant power. And then I got away from that because we took the data center and moved it into a different location. Well, then we had IaaS, and I didn't have to worry about whether or not the CPUs were keeping up because I could just change it. And then we got PaaS, and I didn't have to worry about whether Apache was patched because that was just taken care of. And then we got SaaS, and I didn't have to worry about all these things, right? So take advantage of those. And the thing that enabled us to go and ramp and take advantage of IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS was focusing on identity and implementing security practices that focused on users, so that I could then, as a technologist, focus on business outcomes and not patching routines.
I like that. Yeah, it really is all about kind of moving identity out of the silos and really fully utilizing it across everywhere in your organization. And on that thread, I do want to spend just a moment talking about some of the interesting work that we've done together, Matt. So one way I like how Gartner puts it is access management is a source of context for identity first security strategy. And that's sort of what we're working on right now, is taking identity context and applying it to your broader security strategy. And so what we've done with Okta is create an integration to pull Okta groups into Tessian, so you can use the same group, like the same boundary that you have set for identity for data security policies, for inbound security policies, really to understand your users and even to view their risk from that Okta group lens. And so I've seen kind of a lot of examples in this conversation where pulling identity across your organization, removing it from those silos, and really excited that we started down that path, really Tessian plus Okta here. So really appreciate that, and it's been fun working with you thus far, and we've got cooler stuff coming.
Yeah, and you take technology like that. It sounds simple, just synchronizing group information across a couple of platforms, and sharing some of that data. But when you think about, hey, that's a representation of a role, that's a representation of a right, that's an indication of risk or threat. You can start to use some of these things as really interesting surrogates to allow an identity provider or a downstream SP to make an appropriate authentication or authorization decision.
Exactly. And there's so many opportunities there. It's so much more granular, and there's so much more context coming from the identity. So as we wrap up, some of the key takeaways that I took from you in this conversation, I'm always learning when we talk, is that really, like, where identity is going is having like a key role in sharing like the richest, highest fidelity signals for ultimately driving those outcomes you're looking for that understand the user. Also, there's no silver bullet in your security strategy. It's got to be incremental. It's got to just work over time, and you have to have a pragmatic approach. And then the last thing that I think all of us can really maintain every day is focus on enabling the user. That's what success looks like in security. So again, Matt, really appreciate your time today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Now back to you, Stacia.
Thank you, Matt and Austin. Lastly, I'm delighted to invite a leading cybersecurity trailblazer for this final session. Get ready to hear how she has overcome security challenges and take note of her guiding philosophies on business resilience that have led her to security success. Without further ado, I'm honored to introduce our last session, Security Philosophies from Trailblazers. Q&A with Helen Patton, Advisory CISO at Cisco, and hosted by Josh Yavor, CISO at Tessian.
Thank you, Stacia, and hello, everyone. I'm Josh Yavor, Chief Information Security Officer here at Tessian, and I'm thrilled to welcome Helen Patton to our virtual stage today. Helen is a security and privacy legend with an extensive career across the public and private sectors. I had the pleasure of working with Helen at Cisco and can advocate firsthand to her leadership and the delightful experience of working with her. Helen, welcome, and thank you so much again for being here today.
Josh, it's lovely to see you again. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Let's dive right in. I really want to talk about good security baselines with you to start today. So from your perspective, how would you describe what a good baseline security or baseline is for security for organizations in light of the issues that they face today in 2022?
Yeah, it's really tempting, I think, for organizations to look at the threats that we're facing, supply chain or ransomware or whatever, and want to deal with those things like head on. But the reality is, I think that there's a few things that have to happen before that. I think we need to think about the compliance of the industry that you're in. There's going to be regulators or external auditors or customers who have expectations around how you handle data and how you manage your systems. So, compliance is the first place where I would start. But then compliance doesn't equal security. I recognize that too. So I would then go very quickly into what are good basic cyber hygiene activities. What are the things that are going to help you regardless of the threat or regardless of the issue of the day? And they're things like good asset management, multi-factor authentication, vulnerability management, incident response capabilities. So all of those things are really hard to do well. If you haven't even begun, that's a place definitely to start. And all of those things combined are going to help you deal with whatever the threats of the day are. So that's how I talk to my customers about that. And that's how I think about it for my own programs too.
That's great. And I'm also a big fan of the saying that, the best security practices and privacy practices are the ones that you would do even if there were no regulations or laws or contractual agreements with customers and That's so right. on. Just fundamentally the right things to do. So what's the best way for any organization to get started in assessing their current status against those good practices and maintain an ongoing sense of ongoing assessment, reassessment for those outcomes?
Yeah, I would definitely start with talking to people inside the company. Most people know what's working and what's not working. So spending some time talking to the other security members of the team or the other IT members of the team or risk, compliance, legal, operations folks. Everyone is going to know what's working and what's not. And so you don't have to spend a year doing a full-blown assessment to be able to begin the work of knowing where you need to be putting things in place. So I would start there. I do think from a leadership perspective, though, there is a role to play for bringing in an external assessor to give you an outside-in view as well. So bringing in an external auditor or a consulting firm who's going to come in and take a look at your environment and give you some ways of thinking about leapfrogging to the place you need to be can be a really useful place to start as well. But I wouldn't start with that external view first. I'd start with talking to people who do the jobs day in and day out as the primary source of your information.
The real subject matter experts, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So I think one of the challenges is always maintaining a balance as we're looking at things like these internal and third-party provided assessment processes in balancing being proactive and reactive, because it's always a balance. We're never just one or the other. What are some recommendations that you might have or approaches that work best for organizations as they're trying to align to the right practices and outcomes, but have that balance of proactive and reactive needs that they need to address?
Yeah, I can't talk about being proactive or reactive without talking about a maturity scale. One of the things that's been really useful to me is to reference the cybersecurity matrix, which was something that Sunil Yu created. And in that, he's got assets on the horizontal and the NIST functional areas on the vertical. And you can map your current capabilities to that to see where you're doing well, where you're not, where you're spending a lot of money, where you're not, where you have opportunities, where you don't. And in thinking about that, when I look at how companies evolve, I think people start in an immature space by thinking about being reactive first. So in the NIST language, we spend a lot of time in the identify and protect functional areas. We're getting up to speed with knowing what assets we have, where our data is, what our people do, where our networks are. And all of that's very reactive, but you've got to have that in place in order to get proactive. So once you've got a good basis of knowing what you have, where you have it, whether you've got the right protective controls in place, then you can start to do things with machine learning, dare I say it, artificial intelligence, to be able to start predicting where you might find things that are going wrong. You can start doing red teaming, you can start doing pen testing, you can start doing threat hunting. But unless you've got the foundational elements in place, you actually can't do those other things very well. So it's a maturity curve, and it's not something that's going to happen overnight. But the goal is actually to get to that detective responsive state, that if you just stay in the I'm going to have controls in place to protect, you're really going to suffer when the balloon goes up, and the balloon will unfortunately go up at some point. So you need to be prepared to do that responsive side by having those foundational elements in place first.
Absolutely. And you just described a tremendous amount of work, and work that never ends, and as any security practitioner knows all too well. So how do you go about that journey that you just described while still aligning that effort with core business objectives? What are good strategies for making sure that those outcomes can be achieved, but we're also enabling the business and aligning as necessary?
Yeah, when I talk to customers, and for myself, it takes a lot of effort to work out what the business wants, because there's what the business says, and then there's what the business does. And hopefully you work for a company where those things are aligned, but often they're not aligned. And as the security leader, you've got to look at what they say as well as what they do and find out what's really happening. And then you can start to align your security program behind those business objectives. So right now, one of the things everyone's dealing with is hybrid work and having people work remotely and working from home. I haven't spoken to that many organizations that feel like they've completely got their arms wrapped around that yet, either from a technology HR perspective, but also from a security perspective. Have they got the controls in the right places, doing the right things, taking care of privacy, all of those kinds of things. So right now, a business objective is how do we working in an effective, secure way, line program up behind that. You may work in an organization that's doing a lot of growth, and so you might be thinking about how you align security behind mergers and acquisitions or investments or partnerships. Certainly, third-party supply is both a business opportunity and a security risk and a threat. So thinking about how you can get visibility into your supply chain helps your business move with their supply chain issues as well. So there is one, understanding what the business really wants to do and what they find important, and then seeing how your security stack and your security strategy lines up to that business is really the art of being a security leader, actually. Behind that, there can be a lot of technology controls, but the reality is that if you don't have that vision of why you're doing what you're doing, you can't bring the organization along with you. And so you've got to be really clear on, I'm doing these things because it aligns to the business and this is what the business wants. People can get behind that.
Absolutely. And that's a lot of relationship management and engagement across the organization, right? So
yes.
What are the most frequently successful or effective approaches that you've seen across the industry in terms of getting the right seat at the right table, knowing that you can't be in all the rooms at the same time, and that these are very diverse sets of relationships to maintain? What are some strategies or approaches around that relationship development aspect that you see work most frequently?
Oh, that's a super complicated question, Josh, and that is a master's thesis all on its own. I think the first thing I would say is if you're a security leader or you're responsible for a security program, being very clear with your management chain on where you fit and how they think about your role is super important. And certainly if you're applying for a new leadership job, that's one of the questions you need to ask. I'm less concerned about where a security leader sits in the organization. I'm more concerned about what autonomy they have to deliver what they have to deliver, because there is no other function in an organization that needs to be both codependent and independent of the people they're working with. So you need to have the kinds of relationships where you can be a good partner and work well together, but also have the authority to come in and say, here's a risk you didn't think about, here's my recommendation for you to deal with it, which is often an uncomfortable conversation to have. And you need to have the trust of your partners that you can have those conversations without bumping into sort of political landmines that might come along. So that's the first thing. The second thing I think is you've got to be able to get out and be with your stakeholders before there's an emotional need to be with your stakeholders. So before the incident happens, you need to build the relationships with them. So the senior security roles are less about tech and more about building those relationships, understanding the people who do it really well, understand what motivates their stakeholder partners, and again, align their security verbiage, their stories, their reason for doing security to those motivations. And then they build up the trust with those partners. And so when things do inevitably go wobbly, there's a basis for an ongoing productive relationship to be in place.
Got it. Yeah, I think, it seems to always come back to the, I don't want to say basics because it's far more difficult than basic, but it's all about communication and trust building, right? In terms of those leadership relationships. But let's look inward within security programs that CISOs and others lead. Based on everything we've talked about, the baseline security build out and alignment to good practices and industry and regulatory needs, building out the right role and relationships within an organization. What does that mean for what skills are necessary on security teams these days? So for a security leader to be best capable at what we just described, what are you seeing and how do you think about that today?
So the first thing I'm seeing around security teams is that we all feel like we're under-resourced. We either don't have enough money or we don't have enough people. When it comes to the people side of it, you're going to need to have people on your team who are going to continue to reach for doing things in a better, more efficient way, who are curious, who learn quickly. And from a leadership perspective, you need to find a way to encourage and direct the team without micromanaging the team. Like you can't do everyone's job for them and expect to scale at the speed and size that everybody needs the security team to do it. So you need a leadership team who trusts their organization to do the right thing the right way, that the organizational procedures and structures are in place to encourage that to happen, and then people, regardless of the role they're in, who are constantly looking for improvement opportunities. So you'll notice there that I didn't say anything about technical skill. I think there is a need for a technical skill for sure. And in some roles, that's a very broad generalist kind of role. And in some, it's a very deep technical specialist kind of role. Regardless of the role you're in, technically, you've got to own that space. So if you're in identity management, you've got to continue to learn more about identity management because it changes a lot. If you're in vulnerability management or incident response or hacking, you've got to continue to invest in your own skill set. The company will help you, but if you don't initiate it yourself, you're going to get left behind. So we need people who are going to be self-start. I hate the term self-starters, by the way, but I'm going to use it. Self-starters, because senior leaders aren't going to be there to prod them along, because senior leaders have to be doing all this relationship building and strategic visioning and all the buzzwords that go along with that.
So what I hear you saying resonates, first of all. So let me just say that you're speaking to somebody who I think has made a bit of a leap of faith on some of these fronts, especially in hiring. But I think that's actually a really perhaps hot topic these days. Do you think that the needs in security hiring have actually changed recently? Or have they always been what we're focusing on today and we just didn't realize it until more recently?
It's an excellent question. I think they've always been this way, actually. When I look at job postings and conversations between security people and their HR and recruiting partners, it's really broken. I think one of the things we can be doing as leaders in the security function is to educate ourselves on the right way to ask for talent. I think one of the things I do say is we've had a history of security people of looking for evidence that someone can do a job before we hire them to do the job. And that's pretty, it's a reasonable thing because we're all a bunch of security people and we're trust but verify, right? It's like show me, right? But we're limiting ourselves to people who could do the job but haven't yet. And so I think we need to change our mindset to say, what does the job need? And does the candidate in front of me show the potential for being able to do that? Not does the candidate in front of me show me that they've already done that for 5 years. And I think if we change our mindset, we're going to open ourselves up to have some really excellent talent come into our teams that may not come from a traditional security background, but still blow it out of the water when it comes to doing security things. And so I'm looking for us as an industry to make that pivot. We haven't done it yet. Starting to, but we're not there yet.
I love it. Okay, we are rapidly running short on time. So what I'd like to do is wrap up with one or two additional questions here that bring us to our conclusion. So thinking about broader information security, cybersecurity, whatever we want to call it these days, what do you think is like the one or two like biggest misunderstandings or lack of understanding in our professional space?
First one is that security is a technical discipline. I think security is a business discipline with a technical solution. I am not here can do security if you don't know tech. You need to know tech. But to be able to execute really well and to achieve sustainable outcomes, you've got to understand it as a business problem first and foremost. So I think that's one of the big misunderstandings. I think the other side of it is security can be really broad. Like you could find a security reason for being in a conversation anywhere in the business. Doesn't matter what's happening in the business, there is a security impact to that decision. And I think as security professionals, we want to be everywhere. And I think we need to reset our own boundaries for our own mental health, but also to help the organization understand what security is and what it is not, and where they're responsible for things versus our own responsibilities. So I think there's misunderstandings around where the boundaries are. And that would be the second thing I would say.
Got it. And that second one in particular, what I hear you saying is that there's this need for security leaders to really step away, but then develop the right levels of trust and accountability that's shared in terms of security outcomes. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's right.
Got it. Okay, so perhaps the easiest or most difficult question for last here. We'll see how it goes. But if you had a magic wand, a blank check, whatever you want to call it, and you could change one thing in our industry, what do you think it might be?
I would look to bring in more diverse people into the industry. And this is not a color of skin or a gender or an orientation question. Security for a really long time has been practiced by people with similar backgrounds. And I would really like to see security become a community-wide, and I mean sort of society-wide discipline where everybody feels like they can come in and add their 2 cents. And I think if we do that, we're actually going to be better at defending our organizations and having a much stronger security program. So wave the magic wand, more people, but more people from really different backgrounds is what I'd love to see.
I love it. And I think one of the things that I've noticed firsthand as well as a practitioner is just how well getting that right can pay off. So I fully agree. So unfortunately that we're coming up on time here. So I want to say thank you so much for being here today, sharing these insights with us, and having what was a really fun conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Josh.
I hope our audience has as well.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. And, thank you to our audience as well for tuning in and staying with us throughout the day today. Hopefully you've enjoyed the event, and I'll be handing this back over to Stacia to wrap us up.
Thank you, Helen and Josh, for rounding up the day. And thank you to the rest of our speakers for sharing such powerful stories and insights with us. We've covered a lot today, but the three most important things for you to take away from this event are that 1, human-centric solutions supercharge security. As we heard from Matt Egan at Evercore, Simon at Mishcon de Rea, and several others today, protecting the human layer of security enables employees and secures the trust of clients. Once again, effective security starts with the people. 2, the threats of the future are here. As we heard from Cisco's advisory CISO, advanced threats continue to target core business function. Empowering employees with real-time behavioral tools has become mission critical. And finally, human layer security is the future of enterprise security. As we heard from Matt Egan at Okta, enterprises are drastically pivoting to create a new identity for modern security that prioritizes the human layer. So, on behalf of everyone at Tessian, I want to thank you for joining the Human Layer Security Summit. I hope you've gained a better understanding of how human-centric security solutions can stop inbound threats while amplifying business and empowering your employees to do their best work. And finally, this event would not be possible without the incredible planning and support of our events team and productions team, our speakers, and our partners. I want to say a huge thank you to our audience. You've been fantastic, and as always, help us push the conversations in the industry forward. If you enjoyed watching, please head to humanlayersecurity.tessian.com, where you can join fellow cybersecurity leaders in enjoying hours of free video content from industry trailblazers. Thank you.